As the title to this video suggests, this is one of my favorite modern Vortex products. I have always had a soft spot for the PST Vipers, especially the Gen 2s. In fact, I've owned all of them at one point or another. I always felt that they were the sweet spot in Vortex's lineup for price versus performance. These Filipino-made scopes have always performed incredibly well optically with wonderful feeling and sounding solid controls. And they've developed quite the cult following over the years, and rightfully so. For the sub-$1,000 price point, if you're looking to get into a 3 to 15 or 5 to 25 for precision work that isn't something that's made in China, the PST Gen 2s have always been the go-to recommendation by myself and a lot of other people. However, there were always a few things about them that I would have loved to have seen addressed. And happily, this Viper HD 5 to 25 by 50 has most of those issues ironed out. So let me show you why this is my favorite modern Vortex product. A quick note before we get started. I did buy this pre-owned, and the previous owner did lose the zero stop ring. A quick email to Vortex has rectified that though since I started filming with this thing. The box is standard Viper. It's good. It's got all the information you'll ever ask about this thing on the outside of the box and is very clearly labeled. Inside we have a nice picture and we have the scope cradled in there pretty well. It's not the most amazing package, but it's more than enough. Inside you'll find a tool to remove the caps and compartments, a cleaning cloth, a neoprene scope cover, I wish they'd include caps, a standard 3-inch sunshade, and the owner's manuals for both the reticle and for the optic. Giving this thing a real quick flip through, all of the questions that you might have in regards to the frankly wonderful reticle inside the scope is located inside of this booklet. If you were to have questions about the rest of the Viper HD lineup, don't worry, the second booklet will go over whatever is available at the given time. Currently, this optic is available in MOA, mils, second and first focal plane. When this scope series was first introduced, I thought it was going to be made in China. When I saw that it was made in the Philippines, I had to give it a go. Again, from my previous experience with all other Filipino-made scopes, all of them have been at least good. One area where Vortex has really improved the Viper HD over the PST Gen 2 is in the weight department. 25 ounces is 5+ ounces lighter than the equivalent PST Gen 2 5 to 25. That is a considerable weight savings. Some might assume that as a result of 6 or so ounces being removed from the optic, that it would feel cheaper and be not as nice to operate. And you would be wrong. The fast focus eyepiece is very tight, rock solid in fact, and very smooth. When you don't move it for a while, the seals lock down on it, so you shouldn't have to worry about it getting bumped out of perfect setting. As far as the magnification ring, you can see it's just shy of 180 degrees from throw to throw. The one area I would love to see improved is just a threaded hole and a little cattail on this. It's the only thing that I could say is a negative. As far as the overall texture on the magnification ring, it's pretty good. It's got a pretty aggressive, hard edge to those splines, so it's pretty easy to grip and turn, but a throw lever is still mandatory. One area where they were able to save weight was with the illumination control. The PST Gen 2s have a very large rotary style knob, where the Viper HD, as you can very clearly tell, is a push button. Now I know for a lot of people that's not going to be a personal preference for them. I myself am more of a fan of a rheostat than I am a push button, but in an optic like this where it's so much lighter than much of the competition, which we're going to be talking about when we get to the comparison segment, I don't mind it. Especially considering that this being a 5 to 25, odds of using illumination are going to be a little bit less likely than if it was a 1 to 6, let's say. The side parallax knob goes down to a minimum of 20 yards, which is another improvement over the PST, which is claimed to be 25 yards. We see the same sort of splines on all of the controls and touch points with the exception of the knob for the illumination button, which I really like. If you're grabbing for this thing in the dark and you have no gloves on, you have very understandable fingers, you could feel the difference. However, the outside of the parallax knob is really closely sized to the outside diameter of the battery compartment cover. So if you grab the entire thing and try to make a quick adjustment, You will absolutely unscrew that cover, especially because the knurling on that cover is so aggressive. It's the only real slight that I can give this thing from a design perspective, but I feel if they made the parallax knob any larger, it might interfere with the other turrets. So I'm going to give it a bit of a pass, but it's something you have to be mindful of. Now, many a PST Gen 2 5 to 25 has found its way onto a Bagara B14. For more precision work, they're a match made in budget heaven. I, though, am a huge fan of having a capped windage turret when you have a very lovely Christmas tree style reticle, because I am a holder person. You might be a dialing person, in which case you might already favor the PST Gen 2. But if you like this, the windage turret is sensational. It's quick adjust, so you don't have to worry about any tools, and you make your adjustment, you pull back, you twist, and it is set up flawlessly. The elevation turret is another thing that is set up really, really well. It is locking, 10 mils per rotation, has a good positive sound and feel, and has the zero stop ring that we've seen with both the Venom and the Strike Eagles of yesteryear. About a year or so ago, I reviewed those, and yeah, it's about right. It's great to see that technology in this optic, at the very least. And again, all of the touch points are very similar, with the exception of the knurling on the illumination compartment cover. Everything else has wonderful splines. Everything feels really solid. As far as the cap that holds the elevation turret to the erector, it is quite large and very well situated. There is no zero stop ring in there, unfortunately, again, because the previous owner lost it, but Vortex has been quick to respond and send me in one to have. As far as the fit, feel, and finish, everything on this thing is finished very, very wonderfully. It doesn't feel as robust as the PST Gen 2, primarily just because it's about 6 or so ounces lighter, but it still feels much more substantial than the Razor LHTs. The Razor LHTs have also been known for having problems when you accidentally drop your rifle in the field. Sometimes the scope tube bends. I do not get the feeling that this scope will have such issues. Anyway, let's get behind this thing and let me continue to prove to you why I love this thing. Vortex offers this scope in both second and first focal plane, as well as MIL and MOA. For the second focal plane variants, they are going to have the VMR3 in both MOA and MIL, but this is going to have the VMR4 both in MOA or MIL. This one is, of course, in MIL, and it looks like reticles that we've seen from Vortex in the past, meaning it's very clean, it's very legible, and it's well proportioned. For anyone looking for that more precision point of aim, you have a very fine center dot in the middle and a very wonderfully set up Christmas tree. They did opt to only illuminate the crosshair and not the entire Christmas tree portion. For some, that's going to be a negative. For myself, I'm neither here nor there. If I really need the illumination that much, and I'm going to be holding over for that much elevation or wind, I'm probably not even going to bother taking the shot. But for creating contrast in a shadowy area, under heavy canopy, let's say, I think the crosshair design is more than sufficient. I also believe that the illumination on this thing is a little bit brighter as a result of them just doing the crosshair as opposed to the entire Christmas tree. When you get to both extremes, it will flash to let you know that you are at the minimum or the maximum, and you just keep cycling through the button to adjust it. So as you might have seen, I started this thing at plus 10 mils, not at 0. But nevertheless, this thing still has a fairly anemic overall elevation gain of only 20 mils. Comparing that to the ARC and EP5 or the D&T, the 1, those are 30 and 32 mils. So much more travel. Those are also 34 millimeter tubes, but still This is a little bit light on the elevation adjustment. We're going to segue right into tracking because it's going to be very important to see how a high-powered variable optic like this is going to track. If it doesn't track well, then what's the point? Already the VMR4 reticle lines up to my tracking test target flawlessly, and adjusting the side parallax does not show a giant shift in the 0 point of where the reticle is focused on the target. There's also very little to no purple or green fringing. There might be a slight hue to the image, but the overall image seems a little bit cooler than what actually is visible to the naked eye. Not a pro or a con, just an observation. As far as windage and elevation slop to the erectors, I could not find any, which is, so far, wonderful. From there, we're going to do a step test, 4 mils over and 4 mils up, and this is a good way of just showcasing how everything's going to work in unison with one another. Already, it's proving to track extremely evenly, very consistently, with absolutely flawless execution of getting 4 mils over and 4 mils up. The reticle still lines up to the target perfectly. This is about as good as you could possibly expect a performance to go. Readjusting the windage is as easy as that, and it lines up again perfectly fine. The only thing that we run into is we've run out of elevation gain. Now, this is a fairly aggressive 0, 50-yard 0 for a 22 LR, and everything's in a 0 cant. So if you're planning on using this optic at more extended distances, definitely look into getting a canted mount or base for it. You will thank me later. As far as this thing being twisted and turned and brought back to 0, again, to no real surprise, it performs flawlessly. If this thing went up to 10 plus mils without needing a special mount, I think it would be perfect. So it tracks extremely well, everything is scaled properly, but the elevation gain is a little lacking. But on paper, the PST Gen 2 has the exact same 20 mils of elevation gain. So if you're familiar with that optic, this shouldn't be much of a surprise. As far as the view looking through it, it is very clean. The scope profile, or the amount of body that we see, is very minimal. To the naked eye, it appears much less than what we see here. It's very much in line with the PST Gen 2s and the Razer HD Gen 2s, or Gen 3s for that matter, which is to say it's extremely impressive to get behind. Our field of view is also pretty comparable to what we'd see in the magnification range, 24 feet at the minimum to 4.7 feet at the maximum at 100 yards. Focusing on my eye chart at about 81 yards, I had already set the side parallax roughly to where it needs to be, but I'm able to fine-tune a little bit more to extract what can only be explained as a wonderful looking image. The colors look really good. The resolution and sharpness are both really good. You could read the 11th line on that eye chart, which is pretty dang impressive. There's absolutely nothing I can fault with this. There's 0 purple or green fringing. Everything is sharp and clear from edge to edge. The reticle is easy to read, even though we're looking at a very complicated target as far as a lot of things that are going to give us a challenge as far as looking at it. And shifting the camera side to side at 25x shows that the image stability on this thing is sensational. It seems averagely tight. I'm not going to say it's the best performer or the worst, but it's at least average, if not a touch better. At 20x, we see an improvement as far as how far we can go off the side, but as far as the image stability goes, boy howdy is it nearly impossible to improve upon. At 10x, you might have seen a little bit of a shadow creeping in the far left. It does seem like it has a bit of an inverse bell curve where it's good, gets a little worse, and then gets really good. But it's still more than acceptable. As far as the Eyebox goes, it's great. As far as the image stability goes, it's bang on flawless. I can't fault this whatsoever. To show you what it's like in a more dynamic sense, the illumination is on full. We're going to be going from 5x, 10x, 20, and 25x. At 5x here, again, as good as you could possibly expect a 5 to 25 to be. At 10x, the image is razor sharp, and because the illumination is as good as it is, we can actually see it just out into the shadows ever so slightly, which means that you could be completely off behind this thing, and the illumination, if it's on, will guide you towards the center. It is an insanely good performance by the illumination in this setup. At 20x, sure, the eyebox is going to be tighter, as it's going to be in every optic, but the illumination, as you can see, is super visible, so it allows you to figure out exactly how to get behind it flawlessly, to look through it, and gosh, does it really make a huge difference when you're not perfectly behind this. Even at 25x, you could be completely into the shadows, not being able to look through the optic and still see the illumination. It is sensational. The overall experience of getting behind this thing is breathtaking. Unfortunately, not everything can be mind-blowingly good. The lower light performance on this optic seems to struggle a little bit. Already you can see that it doesn't look as bright through the optic as it does outside of the optic. The reticle is also on the finer side, being more precision focused, so it's a little bit tricky to get it visible without the aid of illumination in a condition like this, but thankfully it's got really good illumination and you shouldn't have to worry about that. It blinks to let us know we're at the maximum illumination, so this is what you could expect at maximum illumination. We have a little bit of a red shadow creeping up at about the 7 or so o'clock position, but it's very minimally noticeable. Minimally noticeable? It's not that noticeable. Panning the camera off to focus on our target with as naked of an eye as possible, you could just try to make out as much detail as there as possible. So when we get behind the scope, you could see it does seem a little bit on the darker side. It's still usable, but it is definitely lacking a little bit over many of the other optics that we've looked at in this magnification range. I don't believe I mentioned it earlier, but the button for the illumination on this thing is very tactile. It's got a really good sound and feel to it, and you know exactly when you're pressing it. It's very well sorted as far as push button illuminations go. At 25x, yeah, the image looks dark. Panning across side to side, you could see that eyebox is definitely tight, but the image stability is still insanely wonderful. And the illumination doesn't even glare out or get blurry or out of focus at all. If there's one positive to say about the low light performance, it does not get worse as you increase magnification. So there's at least that. But still, I'd much rather have as bright of an image for as much of the magnification range as possible. Ultimately, is this a deal breaker for a lot of people? If you plan on using this on a potential hunting rig, it's definitely something that you might have to take into consideration. I do feel it's a little bit on the dimmer side as far as overall light transparency goes, so keep that in mind. Extended ranges is where this scope is going to feel right at home. So we're going to be focusing on exactly that. The reticle, again, in this sort of brushy, woodsy environment, is a bit on the finer side. The posts at 3, 6, and 9 are a good size, they're a good thickness, and they extend to the center pretty far, so it does help draw your eye to the center. Illumination in these conditions, very bright, clear skies, is not going to really be all that usable, and it really shouldn't, because most medium and high-powered variable optics don't really have full-on true daylight bright illumination, because you don't really need it. Focusing on our 360-yard solar panel, however, the reticle starts to come into its own. Even though we're only at 5x, you can still make out a lot of the drops in the Christmas tree, and the center is more or less detectable when you're really focusing on one particular target. Scanning through the woods is not what this optic is designed to do, so there's only so much we can say about it. Increasing the magnification to its maximum. I set the parallax before I increased the magnification, and just look at that image. Need I say more? In fact, I'm not going to say anything. Just appreciate that. It's perfect. You could see that we have some glare coming off the rear lens because we have the sun off at our backs at about the 8 o'clock or so position. So there was some sun that was getting on the lens. There's nothing I could really do about it. And even if there was a way of me covering it and still being able to do what I needed to do in the field properly, It's a good way of seeing what the coatings on the lens is capable of handling as far as, ambient light. Lower light environments, light transmission, it seems a little bit lower than what the average is, but as far as the glare properties go on the glass, I've had very good experiences with this thing. 1,000 yards is what that solar panel is ranged in at. And adjusting the side parallax just so, again, we have as good of a looking image as we could possibly get. There was a ton of mirage in the air. This was filmed in the early to mid part of the summer, so very hot conditions, very hot turbulent air. I think the conditions, I want to say there was a low to mid 80s with pretty high humidity. So air turbulence, or mirage in this case, is going to be apparent, and you can very clearly see that. However, the glass does a very good job of still showing you what the target is despite how much mirage there is. Because we were only able to bring this up 7 or so-ish mils, that's all I was able to bring it up here because I still maintain the same 0. The image does get a little bit darker, but when I say I adjusted the camera by maybe a 32nd of an inch, that's all I adjusted it. Maybe I didn't have it properly set up to be perfectly behind the scope from the beginning, so could that have been on me? Absolutely. But if I did mess up the overall settings for the camera behind the optic from the beginning of this long-range endeavor, well, it just makes the performance that we've seen through this thing so far even more impressive. At plus maximum mils of just around 8 or so, at 1,000 yards, we see no real loss of image quality at 1,000 yards. Bringing our elevation back to 0, you can see the shadows creep in a bit, so I adjust the height on the camera, but I'm talking a couple of pieces of paper is the adjustment there. Very, very minimal. Even if you had a perfect cheek weld, being able to fine-tune that with your eye manually wouldn't be a challenge at all. Setting the side parallax close to infinity for roughly 2,000 yards on these very far extreme towers. Again, despite the mirage, we still have a very usable looking image. 0 purple or green fringing to speak of. The reticle really looks wonderful here. And as far as shifting the camera side to side to look at the image stability once more before we get into the side-by-side comparisons, it's just perfect. It's so perfect. It was bound to happen sooner or later. The Viper HD on the left versus the PST Gen 2 on the right. Both of these in their 5 to 25 by 50 first focal plane mil setups. Now the crop on the PST Gen 2 is a little bit more extreme than what we see with the Viper HD on the left. I've changed my camera settings a lot. I've changed the way I filmed a lot. And yes, there's going to be a slight discrepancy between the two. Does that mean that the Viper has the exact same view looking through it as the PST Gen 2? Not quite. I think the Viper HD is definitely a little bit more reserved as far as the view looking through it, but it's still very good. But the PST Gen 2 is just monstrously good. At 100 yards, focusing on very similar setup style targets, both of these are producing wonderful images. Now, yes, the light difference between these 2 days filming, I mean, these are probably about a little over a year apart, everything's going to be slightly different. But I still try to maintain all of my settings to be as consistent as possible. The Viper HD on the left has wonderful resolution. The PST Gen 2 on the right also has wonderful resolution. It could just be the way the shadows are creeping over the targets on the right-hand side for the PST Gen 2, but the Viper HD here seems like it has just the edge on the overall sharpness. Could I be splitting hairs? Yes, I could. While we look at this a little bit more before we shift our attention to a different target, the length on the PST Gen 2 is 15.79 inches. On this Viper HD, Vortex claims 15.2 inches, so about a half inch shorter with the new HD. As far as the weight, 31.2 ounces for the PST versus 25 for the Viper. Field of view is more or less the same, but the PST Gen 2 just edges it out by 1/10 of a foot at the minimum and the maximum. So 24.1 to 24 and 4.8 to 4.7. Not a considerable difference. Eye relief on both of them is 3.4 inches. The minimum parallax goes to the Viper HD at 20 yards. The PST Gen 2 is only good for 25. Woo! But for someone, that 5-yard difference might make all of the difference in your purchase decision. At 180 yards on steel berms, Starting with the PST Gen 2, it's a good looking image, but the Viper HD just seems to have the sharpness edge. And that is something that I can't unsee once you start playing around with the Viper HD as much as I have. It just seems to perform wonderfully when it comes to sharpness. I'm not saying that the PST Gen 2 is a slouch, but as you can see, I dial the parallax a little bit better, and it still looks about the same. Focusing our attention on, yet again, two similarly-ish sized and shaped targets at 200 yards. The PST Gen 2 is going to look like it has a little bit better contrast over the Viper. The Viper video came out a little washed up because it was an extremely bright day when I filmed that, and my camera settings were slightly off, so I had to tweak it a little bit, and it does look a little bit more washed out. The PST has more vibrancy as far as the colors and the depth goes, but the Viper HD still has the sharpness edge. If both of these were side by side, I think you'd have a really hard time picking out which one was which, unless you actually saw what the bodies were and you manipulated them. But as far as raw overall optical performance, I do think the Viper HD is better, but only by a small margin. The PST Gen 2 still performs insanely well for what it is. Keep in mind, that optic is, what, 10 or so years old? It's not a spring chicken anymore. But regardless of that fact, optically it still performs wonderfully. To answer the big question, if you have a PST Gen 2, do you upgrade to the Viper HD? Only if you value what the Viper HD has as far as the weight savings, the illumination, and the turret setups. If you are between these two for your own personal uses, what do you value? Do you value what the Viper HD brings to the table as far as controls, or the PST Gen 2? If you don't care either which way and you just want to get one of these, you could flip a coin and be happy with either of them. They're both priced the exact same. They're both made in the Philippines. They both offer a lot of the same features as one another. The Viper HD is set up more towards that combination role of hunting and precision work, whereas the PST Gen 2 is much more focused on precision work prioritized. Is there a wrong choice or a bad choice here? Absolutely not. Keeping right along with the Vortex comparisons, we're going to look now at the Strike Eagle 5-25 by 56. This first focal plane 34mm tubed behemoth is not directly set up to compare directly against the Viper HD, but you might be looking to spend the $800 or so that the Strike Eagle costs, up to about the $1,000 that the Viper HD costs. Now, the Strike Eagles are made in China. For many of you, that won't make a lick of difference. Price-wise, I already mentioned the difference, about $200, the Strike Eagle being less expensive. It is shorter by almost a full inch over the Viper HD, but it is over 5 ounces heavier. Field of view, ironically, is the exact same. Exit pupil for the Strike Eagle is 11.2 to 2.2. The Viper HD, I don't have any specs on. I might go as far as to say the Strike Eagle has the slight edge in that department. Eye relief is pretty close. The Viper is at 3.4, Strike Eagle 3.6, but the minimum parallax is actually going to go to the Strike Eagle at 15 yards versus 20 yards. As far as the elevation gain, this is the big one thanks to the 34mm tube, 20 mils with the Viper, 31 mils for the Strike Eagle. But everything else about the Viper is better. The feel, the fit, the finish, and the optics are vastly superior with the Viper HD over the Strike Eagle. Sure, the Strike Eagle is set up more tactically. It's got that look. It's got the larger tube, the larger front objective, locking windage and elevation turrets, and it's just got a different overall look and vibe about it. The Viper HD is long, sleek, slender. It is more of a model than it is just a sledgehammer. Doesn't make any sense, but if you look at these two side by side, you'll understand what I'm talking about. The Strike Eagle is a pretty good performing optic, but at $800, I think it starts getting outclassed by many of the competition, whether it's internal to Vortex or you're talking about other scope manufacturers and what they bring to the table for probably a lot less money. $800 is nothing to scoff at. And for that price, I think the Strike Eagle is definitely in the lacking department. Sure, it has about the same size view looking through it as the Viper HD, but it's got more chromatic aberration. The image does get a little bit darker as we increase the magnification. It doesn't have the same vibrancy to the image and overall usefulness, I feel. It doesn't have the same image stability as the Viper. it's just not as good as the Viper. It's nowhere near as nice to operate and manage and handle. It's still a capable optic, and if you could find one for $400 or $500, I think it's definitely a very compelling argument. If you already have one and you like one, would you upgrade to the Viper HD? Should you? Only if you, again, really feel the need. Between these two, though, for the $200 price difference, I would happily take the negatives or the cons of the Viper HD over the Strike Eagle as far as overall elevation gain for what I feel is just a better overall package. Next up, I feel, is probably going to be the Viper HD's biggest competitor, and that's going to be the Bushnell Match Pro ED. I was looking to buy a Match Pro ED since I first reviewed it. I love that optic and what it brings to the table. For the $700 or so that it costs, being a 5 to 30 by 56 millimeter scope with a 34 millimeter tube, it's just a wonderful optic. Lengthwise, they're about the same. Weight-wise, the Match Pro ED is 7 ounces heavier. Field of view is ironically just about the same. Eye relief is pretty close to the same, but the Match Pro ED does have a 5-yard closer minimum parallax at 15 yards versus 20. The Viper is still, I feel, the better optical performance between these two, but the Match Pro ED is a sledgehammer of an optic. Much more focused on tactical style shooting. It fills that role perfectly. The reticle on the MPED, I feel, is better suited for quick acquisition and usefulness at any sort of magnification. Even here at its minimum of 5x, it's still pretty easy to pick up, especially on rough terrain. Optics goes to the Viper HD. Overall control and usability, this is basically a coin flip, because both of them are going to be set up a little bit differently, but both of them perform really well in their intended roles. The Match Pro ED is definitely set up more towards tactical precision, and the Viper HD, I feel, is a really good slot in between hunting and tactical. If you were looking for an in-between combination of a scope, the Viper HD is, for me, the clear winner. If you're looking for something that's going to be a little bit more tactical, take you out to a little bit higher magnification, just give you a really nice overall package for about a $300 price savings, the Match Pro ED is extremely hard to beat. Everything about the Match Pro is great for what it is. Everything about the Viper HD is pretty great for what it is. So these two are actually very close to one another. As close as they are, though, there is still a very clear line between these two, and that is just their ultimate overall use case. The Viper HD can fit in a multitude of roles. The Match Pro ED definitely fits more towards the precision tactical side of things, but both of them are exceptional optics for their price points. I'm going to close this comparison out with something that you'll never compare a Viper HD to, and that is a Tangent Theta 525 Professional, where this is a 5 to 25 by 56 with a 34 millimeter tube, yada yada yada. The price point on this thing is 6 times that of the Viper HD, because the 525 Professional, as well as every single other Tangent Theta that they produce, is basically handcrafted in Canada. So these two aren't even in the same county or state, let alone ballpark. The Viper HD is a very low to mid-range budget entry-level optic. The 525 Professional is a no-holds-barred, be as optically flawless as you can possibly be. And that's what the 525 Professional is. Despite the price difference, despite everything, I'm not even going to bother running down all the differences as far as specs between these two. The 525 Professional is still, I'd have to say, the cleanest looking glass I've ever looked through. It's breathtaking. I didn't want to send it back. I wish I could have kept it. And if I did, I would have kept it on my shelf so I could pull it off whenever I want and just look at it, hold it, manipulate it. The controls, perfect. The fit and finish, perfection. And despite its $6,000 price point, the Viper HD, again with its off-white slightly over-filmed brightness settings on the camera when I filmed it because I'm an idiot. It's not that far off from what the 525 Professional can produce image sharpness and clarity wise. Yes, the tangent Theta is better, but the Viper HD is not that far behind. And for 1/6 the price, I only want to showcase this because the 525 Professional is as good as I've ever been able to achieve with an optic as far as recording through it and just being blown away by its overall setup and performance. But the Viper HD is not that far off. These two side by side, if I had them in hand on the exact same day, exact same conditions, I feel would be even closer than what they look like right now. So that's really speaking in volumes for how good the Viper HD is performing at its price point. And that in and of itself is insane to me. I wasn't too sure what to expect with the Viper HD. My expectations were really high. I've been expecting a PSD Gen 3, as I'm sure many of you have, for way too long. I've heard rumors that the PSD Gen 3s are in development. Whether they're in production or not, or in testing, I don't really know. I cannot say for sure. My sources could only give me so much information that they're comfortable putting out there. But I think it's high time we got the PSD Gen 3. The Viper HD is not a PSD Gen 3 competitor, or replacement, I should say. It's an evolution of the PSD Gen 2 for sure, but I don't think it's as tactically sound as I feel the PSD Gen 3s should be, could be, and hopefully can be when they come out to market. That is why this optic is almost in a bit of a class of its own. I really should have compared this to the Razer LHT, the 4.5 to 22. One of the reasons why I didn't is just, as much as I like the LHT and I really, really like it, I like the setup of the Viper HD a lot more. It feels more substantial in hand without weighing that much more. I mean, yeah, the LHT is about 22 ounces, so it's 3 ounces lighter than this. But there have been a lot of reports of LHTs going down in the field on a hunt, let's say. People have dropped their rifle, and the scope tube gets bent. And now the optic is completely out of commission. There is a fine line between going too extreme in one way or the other. On one hand, you have the Razer LHT, like I just said, which is so thin, if you tap on the tubes just right, it feels like there's nothing there. That's the one end of the extreme. The other end of the extreme is the Razer HD Gen 2s, where if we were to talk about the 4.5 to 27 by 56, that's more than double the weight of the LHT at 48.5 ounces, where it's designed to be just as rugged and robust as possible. The Viper HD finds itself somewhere in the middle, finding a sweet spot between too light and way too heavy. 25 ounces for a 5 to 25, that sounds exceptional. It's a few ounces lighter than the average, about 5 or 6 ounces or so, which is the weight of most mounts or ring solutions. So you could really save a lot of weight. But it doesn't feel cheap. It doesn't feel flimsy. It doesn't feel like an optic that if you look at it funny, something might fail on it. I really do feel that Vortex struck a really nice fine balance here, because it is capable of doing both the lighter weight hunting stuff and the heavier, more tactical stuff, with the exception of the elevation gain. And that's the thing that I really need to drive home for a lot of people. I plan on actually keeping this optic. I bought it used to put on my CZ457, which I wanted to get more into precision work with. And I felt that this optic would fit the role perfectly because I didn't want that rifle to be 20 pounds. I wanted it to be as lightweight as possible, but still give me the maximum potential and practicality of having a 5 to 25 on it. Again, this Viper HD, bang on perfect for the money. But 7 mils of elevation gain or so is not going to be enough for me to extract that rifle's maximum capacity. So I'm going to have to get a canted mount or a new canted rail for it, which I'm not really excited about. However, despite that shortcoming, I cannot wait to use this optic, because getting behind it, looking through this thing, making adjustments with it, playing around with it, and just using it as you would use a high-powered variable optic like this The overall experience is wonderful. I really prioritize image quality, sharpness, image stability over most other qualities when it comes to a high-powered variable optic, because odds are you're going to be in a more stable position with a pretty good cheek weld. And this optic rewards you for being even in a bad position with a bad cheek weld. It's just so enjoyable to use. It's so eager and willing to help you be as good of a shooter as possible. It really is something I've grown to love and appreciate, despite its minor nuances, like the battery compartment cover being a little bit too large, or rather the parallax not being a little bit too small, where if you grab it and twist it counterclockwise really fast, you're probably going to unscrew the battery compartment cover. It's a pet peeve of mine, but I'm going to be able to look past that because of how the rest of this optic performs. Now, you, on the other hand, might not be able to accept that, in which case there is a plethora of different optics available on the market, both in the same price point as this or much cheaper. But if you are looking for an optic that can do multiple roles, really fit that hunting / tactical rifle setup, this optic should be on your short list. I adore this thing. It's going to be going on my CZ457 Precision, and it's probably going to stay there until something else knocks it off its pedestal. But I love the overall setup of this thing, and I cannot wait for the PSD Gen 3s. I really, really hope Vortex can just improve upon this even further. And if they can, wow, am I going to be excited to see what that optic is capable of. With all that being said, a huge thank you for all of you for making this video possible, because I bought this with money that I've gotten from my Patreon subscribers, my Subscribe Star subscribers, and people that have used my affiliate links over the past few years. So thank you all so much for making this video possible. I will use the scope in your honor. With all that being said, thank you very much for watching. And as always, I'll see you again next time. And a huge thank you to my Patreon providers and my Subscribe Star subscribers. Without you, this truly wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to support my channel but don't want to join either of those, I completely understand. But you could still help by using my affiliate links in the description below, and or like, share, and subscribe as always. Again, thank you very much.